Right now, the world sees Billie Eilish as a headline. Arena lights, camera flashes, a voice that can hush millions with a single breath. But rewind, and the now version of Billie was once a kid making strange, whisper-dark pop from a bedroom, hoping the internet would listen for 10 seconds. So what actually changed? The music, the image, or the way fame tried to rewrite who Billie was allowed to be? In this then versus now story, we're not just comparing outfits or hair. We're tracking 3 turning points. One that launched everything, one that split the audience, and one that quietly made Billie the one in control. Stay to the end, because the pattern is hiding in plain sight. And here's the twist. The most controversial shift wasn't a rebrand. It was a survival move. Before we jump into the timeline, here's the promise of this video. This is not a glow-up montage. Then versus now only works when it reveals a deeper truth, why an artist's choices make sense from the inside, even when the outside world turns them into memes, hot takes, or headlines. So we're tracking Billie Eilish through 3 lenses. First, sound. Not just hits, but how the songwriting and vocal choices evolve. What gets louder, what gets quieter, what becomes sharper with time. Second, image. Not fashion for fashion's sake, but image as a tool, sometimes a shield, sometimes a statement, sometimes a boundary. Third, fame. The invisible pressure that changes everything. The way people look at you, talk about you, and expect you to stay frozen in one version of yourself forever. And here's the big question we'll answer by the end. Is now Billie stronger, or just better at surviving? Because success doesn't always heal the parts of you that fame exposed. It sometimes just teaches you how to hide them. We'll move in 7 chapters. The moment you recognize now, the rules of the journey, the bedroom era then Billie didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived quietly, like a secret you weren't supposed to hear. Before the world started calling her a generational voice, Billie was a teenager in a normal house with a not-so-normal instinct. She could turn a small feeling into a whole atmosphere. Not a big pop moment, an atmosphere. The kind that creeps into your headphones late at night and makes you think, how does this song know me? That's what the early era really was. Not fame, but signal. A strange frequency that only worked because it didn't sound like it was trying to win. The vocal choices were intimate, almost private, more confession than performance. The melodies didn't rush to impress you. They lingered. They let silence do some of the talking. And that's important because the silence wasn't empty. It was tense. It was cinematic. It felt like walking down a hallway with the lights off and somehow enjoying the fear. There's a reason people talk about the bedroom myth like it's a fairy tale, because it is. A kid, a mic, a laptop, and suddenly the internet is paying attention. But the real magic isn't the equipment. It's the decision to sound different even when being different is risky. Billie's early identity wasn't built on proving she could belt louder than anyone else. It was built on the opposite: control, restraint, precision. Like she understood that if you whisper at the right moment, the whole room will lean in. And then Ocean Eyes becomes the spark. The moment the song slips out of the room and into the world, and the world doesn't just listen, it stares. Overnight, the vibe people loved became something they wanted to explain, categorize, and claim. Suddenly, she wasn't simply a kid making songs. She was the new thing, a label that sounds flattering until you realize it's also a trap. Because once the internet decides you're the new thing, it starts demanding you stay the same forever. And that's where the real tension begins. The closer Billie gets to the spotlight, the smaller her personal space becomes. The very intimacy that made the music feel honest now makes her feel exposed. People don't just hear the songs, they project onto the person. They build a version of her in their heads and then punish her when she doesn't match it. Here's what happens when a quiet artist becomes a global event. The world turns the volume up for you, even if your entire magic came from whispering. Billie didn't just grow an audience. Billie grew a spotlight. And a spotlight doesn't simply illuminate, it presses. It turns every choice into a statement, every outfit into a headline, every facial expression into proof of a narrative someone already decided was true. This is the moment the bedroom-era intimacy collides with the machinery of pop culture. The sound evolves, still dark, still precise, but now built to fill larger rooms. The production gets heavier, the hooks get sharper, and the atmosphere becomes more cinematic. When we all fall asleep, where do we go? Lands. It doesn't feel like an album trying to fit in. It feels like a world with its own rules. Billie isn't chasing mainstream approval. Mainstream attention is chasing Billie. And that shift is important because it changes the stakes. Suddenly, it's not just, do people like this song? It's, can this artist survive becoming a symbol? Because once an artist becomes a symbol, everyone starts arguing over what the symbol means. Some people want Billie to be the face of vulnerability. Others want Billie to be the face of rebellion. Some want Billie to stay mysterious forever. Others demand transparency. The same traits that made Billie interesting, restraint, minimalism, that eerily calm presence, get interpreted in 100 contradictory ways. And that's where the pressure becomes personal. Fame doesn't only give you opportunity, it gives strangers permission. Permission to judge your body, your mood, your relationships, your attitude. Permission to treat your growing up like public property. If you change, you're fake. If you don't change, you're stuck. If you speak, you're complaining. If you stay quiet, you're cold. It's a maze designed so the walls always win. So Billie adapts, not by becoming louder, but by becoming more controlled. The image becomes deliberate. The presence becomes strategic. The distance becomes a boundary, not a flaw. People think they're watching a style choice, but what they're really watching is a survival mechanism forming in real time. Because the truth is, being famous too fast doesn't just speed up your career, it speeds up your identity crisis. And right when the world thinks it finally understands who Billie is, Billie makes a move that splits the audience in half.
This is where the story gets messy, because it's the point where people stopped listening to Billie's music with their ears and started watching Billie with their opinions. From the outside, it looked like a switch flipped, a different kind of public presence, a different kind of styling, a different kind of attention. And the internet did what it always does, turned a human timeline into a courtroom. One side called it rebrand, like it was a marketing move. The other side called it growth, like it was inevitable. But the truth is, both sides were describing the same thing from different angles. Control. If, then Billie was a bedroom voice slipping through the cracks, this era is Billie realizing the world won't just consume the art, it will try to consume the person. And when that happens, image stops being decoration. Image becomes negotiation, a boundary you set before strangers set it for you. Here's the part people miss. Audiences say they want artists to be authentic, but they often mean, stay the version of you I first loved. That's not authenticity. That's a freeze frame. And Billie's biggest offense in the eyes of the internet was simply refusing to stay frozen. So yes, some people saw a transformation and assumed it had to be fake. But you can also read it as something more human. A young artist trying to grow up in public without being torn apart for every step. Because for women in pop, the microscope is brutal. Everything becomes a symbol. Everything becomes a message. Even silence becomes a headline. Musically, this shift doesn't feel like a costume change. It feels like an emotional zoom in. The writing starts sounding less like a nightmare you can't wake from and more like a diary you finally stopped hiding. Happier Than Ever doesn't just show maturity. It shows a new willingness to name the pressure out loud, to admit the cost, to let anger exist without apologizing for it. And that's why this era split people, because it forced a choice. You can treat Billie like a product that must stay consistent, or you can treat Billie like a person who's allowed to evolve. And right here, right after the world argues over whether the change was real, Billie quietly steps into the next phase, not just surviving fame, but steering it. Now Billie isn't just bigger. Now Billie is sharper, like someone who learned the rules of the room and decided not to play scared anymore. At this stage, the most important change isn't her visibility, it's her ownership. Early on, Billie felt like a secret the internet discovered. Then she became a phenomenon the culture tried to define. But now she operates like an artist who understands that the loudest thing you can do in pop is choose your own narrative and refuse to explain it to people who only want a simplified version. Musically, the now era feels less like proving and more like shaping. There's confidence in the restraint, confidence in leaving space, confidence in letting a song breathe instead of forcing it to impress you every 5 seconds. Hit Me Hard and Soft lands like that. Not an attempt to chase a trend, but a statement that Billie can bend the room's energy whenever she wants. The emotional range expands, softness without weakness, intensity without chaos. It's a sound that trusts the listener to follow. And then there's the public presence. Billie's image doesn't feel like branding anymore. It feels like a language she speaks fluently, sometimes playful, sometimes armored, sometimes stripped down. Not because she needs approval, but because she knows people will talk no matter what. The difference is, the talk doesn't drive the wheel. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Creative power doesn't erase the cost of being watched. If anything, success can make the pressure more sophisticated. The expectations become quieter but heavier. Be legendary, be consistent, be inspiring, be relatable, be private, be open, be everything, all the time. When you're at the now stage, you're not just dealing with critics, you're dealing with projection. Millions of people placing their feelings on you and calling it love. So what does now Billie do with that? She tightens the borders. Not to punish the audience, but to protect the person inside the artist. You can hear that boundary making in the music, the way certain lines sound like they were written after a long night of realizing that being misunderstood is sometimes safer than being fully seen. You can see it in the way she navigates interviews, appearances, and hype cycles with a kind of controlled calm, like someone who already survived the worst version of fame and refuses to repeat it. And this is the key point. Billie didn't become less emotional. Billie became more intentional. So when people say Billie changed, they're right. But the more interesting question is what stayed the same. Because the one thing that connects then and now isn't the look or the charts. It's the atmosphere, the honesty, the way Billie can make the world lean in. Which brings us to the final chapter. What never changed, and why that's the real reason this story works.
If you strip away the headlines, the aesthetics, the debates, and the timelines, the core of Billie Eilish looks surprisingly simple. She has always built a world you can step into. That was true in the bedroom era, when the songs felt like secrets. It was true in the explosion era, when the world got louder around her. And it's true now, when she has the power to shape the room instead of being shaped by it. The then versus now difference is scale. The then versus now similarity is intention. Billie didn't stop being vulnerable. She learned how to carry vulnerability without letting it become public property. She didn't stop being mysterious. She learned when mystery is protection and when it's art. So is now Billie stronger? Or just better at surviving? Maybe the answer is both. Because strength at this level isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing what you give the world and keeping the rest for yourself. And if you go back to the opening image of now, you can hear then inside it. The same quiet pull that makes you lean in,